The desert wind moved low through the tall grass, whispering around the edges of the small village that lay at the mouth of the canyon. It was the last hour before dusk, when the sky burned copper and the world seemed made of dust and longing. A lone rider appeared on the ridge, dark against the fading sun, his horse moving slow and tired from the trail. Down below, smoke curled from the chimneys of a few cabins, wooden homes that had stood against the wind for a generation. The people of the valley were quiet folk, bound by the hard land and by their silence. They worked their fields, kept their cattle, and buried their dead in the same small patch of dry earth behind the chapel. Life did not change much here, until he came back. The Apache had once lived beyond the far hills where the red rocks rose like broken teeth. The white men had taken his valley, his horses, and his people. Some said he had vanished into Mexico. Others whispered that he had been shot near the river and left for dead. But now, after 3 long years, he had returned, scarred, silent, and carrying something colder than vengeance in his eyes. Those who saw him pass down the old road that evening said his horse didn't make a sound, and that his shadow stretched longer than any man should. By the time he reached the village, lamps had begun to glow behind window glass. He stopped by the old well in front of the blacksmith's shop and looked around at the familiar faces. Older now, wearier. They watched him from their doorways, the children clutching their mothers' skirts. No one spoke. The wind stirred the dust between them like ghosts rising. Then his gaze settled on one cabin near the edge of the field, a small house with a crooked fence, a hanging lantern, and the faint sound of a woman humming inside. He dismounted, tying his horse to the post, and walked toward the light. Inside, the woman froze when she heard the door creak. Her hands trembled above the wooden table. She knew that sound, had dreamed of it for years, waking in the dark with her heart pounding. Slowly she turned. The firelight touched his face, the same sharp jaw, the scar that ran down from his temple, the eyes that still burned like the desert itself. He looked thinner now, more hollow, but his presence filled the room like thunder. For a long moment neither spoke. Then she whispered his name, barely more than breath, and he answered only by looking at her the way he once did before the war, and the loss, and the long years apart. The silence between them was thick with everything that had been left unsaid. She had a child now, barely 4, with soft hair and bright eyes. He looked at the small bed in the corner and then back at her, as if he already knew. She wanted to speak, to explain, but the words wouldn't come. He stepped closer, each footfall slow and measured, like a man walking into the memory of his own life. The air between them carried the scent of smoke and rain-soaked dust. When he finally spoke, his voice was low, almost a growl, as if scraped raw from too many nights alone. "You thought I was gone," he said. "But the land never lets a man disappear. Not when his blood still calls for what was taken." Her eyes glistened. "You can't stay here," she whispered. "They'll come for you. The ranchers, the soldiers, if they see you." He cut her off with a small motion of his hand. "I came because you called me," he said quietly. "Not with words. But I heard you just the same." Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the shutters. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote cried. The lamp flickered, and for a heartbeat, the room fell into darkness. When the flame returned, he was standing closer, close enough that she could see the faint tremor in his jaw. "I came to take back what was mine," he murmured. "The peace they stole, the life they ruined. And you." His gaze dropped briefly to her hands, the same hands that once had healed his wounds, that had once reached for him in the night. "You belong to this land," he said, "and to me. Again and again you will yield to me until my child grows within you." Her breath caught, the words falling over her like heat and thunder. There was no anger in his tone, only a deep, aching certainty. It wasn't the voice of a conqueror. It was the voice of a man who had lost everything and returned to claim only what his heart still remembered. But she stepped back, shaking her head. "You don't understand," she said, her voice breaking. "That time is gone. I built a life here. The world's changed." He looked around the small cabin, the simple furniture, the tools, the traces of a quiet existence, and something dark crossed his face. "The world doesn't change," he said. "Only men forget what they promised." She turned away, pressing a hand to her chest. "You can't stay," she repeated, almost pleading now. "If they find you here, they'll hang you before sunrise. Please, just go while you can." But he didn't move. His eyes softened. A shadow of the man he once was flickering through. "You were the only light left in a dark world," he said. "I came through fire and dust to find you again. I won't leave you to them." From outside came the clatter of hooves. A rider's shout broke the quiet, followed by the faint jingle of spurs. The woman's face drained of color. "They're coming," she whispered. "You have to hide." He glanced toward the door, his hand moving to the knife at his belt. "No," he said softly. "Not this time." She crossed the room and grabbed his arm. "Please," she said. "Don't fight them. There's a child here. He'll wake." Her voice cracked on the last word. The child stirred in his bed, letting out a small sound before falling silent again. The Apache looked at the boy, then at her, and something shifted in his expression. A flash of confusion, then understanding. His hand dropped from the knife. He took a slow step toward the bed, looking down at the sleeping child, and the faintest tremor moved across his lips. "Who is he?" he asked, though his voice already held the answer. She swallowed hard. "He's yours," she said. The words hung in the air like smoke, heavy and irreversible. Outside, the riders drew closer, their torches cutting through the night. The Apache turned toward the window, his shoulders straight, his eyes fixed on the firelight moving through the dark. He reached for his rifle leaning against the wall, then paused. "Then I have a reason to stay," he said quietly. She shook her head, tears sliding down her cheeks. "If you stay, they'll kill you. If you fight, they'll burn this house." He looked at her again, and for a moment, the fierce warrior faded into the man she had once loved, the man who used to whisper to her beneath the stars. He brushed his fingers against the doorframe, tracing the wood as if memorizing it. "Then I'll stand long enough for him to remember," he said. The sound of boots hit the porch. A man's voice called her name, demanding she open the door. She froze, torn between fear and hope. The Apache turned toward her once more. "When the sun rises," he murmured, "you'll know what I came for." Then he pulled the rifle close, his shadow stretching across the room as the lantern flame wavered in the growing storm of light and sound outside. The door shuddered beneath a heavy knock. The child stirred again, whispering something in his sleep, and in that fragile, suspended moment, between love and vengeance, between past and fate, the woman realized the night was only just beginning. The knock came again, louder this time, followed by the scrape of boots outside. The woman's heart pounded so hard she thought it might give her away. The Apache stayed still, his body tense, his eyes locked on the door. The fire popped in the hearth, a single ember jumping and rolling across the floorboards. The child stirred once more, then went quiet again. Outside, someone shouted her name. Her neighbor, the one who brought her flour and news from town. He was a decent man, but not one to let a stranger linger near his land without asking questions. The Apache looked toward the window, measuring the distance, the light, the sound of the horses. "How many?" he asked in a whisper. She swallowed. "3, maybe 4, she said. They came fast. I think one's from the fort." His jaw tightened. He reached for the curtain and pulled it back just enough to see. The glow of torches painted the night in shades of gold and red. The men dismounted, their rifles slung across their backs. One of them carried a lantern, sweeping it toward the cabin. "They know someone's inside," she whispered. He let the curtain fall back into place and turned to her. "Then they'll know soon enough who." She stepped forward and caught his arm. "You can't fight them here. Please, there's a child." Her voice trembled. "If you're caught, they'll hang you. If you run now, you might still have a chance." His gaze softened for a moment, but there was something unyielding behind it, a quiet determination that came from more than anger. "You think I fear them?" he asked. "I've faced men who burned villages and laughed while the wind carried the screams. I have nothing left to lose." "But you do," she said softly, glancing toward the small bed. "You have him now." The words hit him like a stone thrown into still water. He turned toward the boy, sleeping with his small hand curled around the edge of the blanket. The Apache's eyes flickered, as if something fragile had cracked open inside him. He didn't speak, not for a long moment. Then he said, "He should not wake to the sound of gunfire." From outside, the neighbor's voice grew sharper. "You there? We saw your horse. Step out slow, hands where we can see him." The Apache's hand went to his knife, then stopped halfway. He drew in a long breath, as though listening to something far away. Finally, he whispered, "Hide me." She blinked, caught off guard. "Where?" "Somewhere they won't look." She moved quickly, leading him to the back room where sacks of grain were stacked high. The old trapdoor beneath the boards opened to a crawl space, once used for storing preserves when the summer heat spoiled the rest. She lifted it, the hinges groaning softly. He crouched low, eyes never leaving hers. "Don't let them in too long," he said quietly. "I'll try." Before he climbed down, he paused. "If they search this place, if they find me, take the boy and run to the canyon. There's an old stone hollow near the dry creek. You'll be safe there until dawn." She nodded, barely able to breathe. "Just stay quiet," she whispered. He gave her one last look, something fierce and sad all at once, then disappeared into the dark beneath the floor. She lowered the hatch, brushed loose dirt over the seam, and stood, forcing her trembling hands to steady. Another knock. Then the door swung open without waiting for her answer. The lantern light poured in, and the three men stepped across the threshold. The first was her neighbor, his face drawn tight with concern. Behind him came a soldier in a dusty uniform, and another man whose eyes were too quick, too sharp. "Evening, ma'am," the neighbor said, tipping his hat. "We saw a horse tied up out front. Don't mean to intrude, but the marshal sent word from town. A dangerous Apache was spotted on this trail. You seen anyone pass by?" She forced a small, nervous smile. "No one. I've been home with my boy all evening." The soldier stepped forward, looking around the cabin. "Mind if we take a look?" Her pulse spiked. "It's just me and the child," she said. "You won't find any outlaws here." The sharp-eyed man grinned, showing yellowed teeth. "Funny thing, though, that horse out there's not yours. Ain't seen a mare like that round these parts in a while." He took a step closer to the table, running his hand over the wood as though feeling for something beneath it. "Wouldn't want to think you were hiding anyone." Her voice wavered. "I told you, there's no one." The neighbor looked uneasy. "Now let's not trouble the lady more than we need to," he said. "She's been through enough on her own." But the soldier ignored him. "If he's here, we'll find him." He motioned toward the back. "Search the place." The men began to move through the cabin, lifting curtains, opening drawers, peering into shadows. The woman stood still, every muscle rigid. Beneath her feet she could feel a faint shift of air, the Apache breathing in the space below. When one of the men neared the trap door, she spoke quickly. "Please, be careful. The floorboards are loose there. I've been meaning to fix them." The soldier paused, squinting at her. "Loose, huh?" He gave the boards a light tap with his boot. The hollow sound made her heart stop. He frowned but moved on, lifting a pot lid and shaking his head. "Nothing here." The neighbor cleared his throat. "We should get going before the storm rolls in. Marshall said he was headed west. No reason to bother the lady further." The soldier hesitated, then nodded. "Fine, but if you see anything or anyone, you ride to town right away." She managed a small nod. "I will." When they finally stepped outside, she closed the door and leaned against it, her knees weak. The sound of their voices faded, followed by the soft clatter of hooves. She waited until the last echo disappeared before lifting the trap door. The Apache climbed out, his face calm but his eyes burning with quiet fury. "They'll be back," he said. "They don't give up once the scent is found." She turned toward him, her voice trembling. "Then go, tonight, before they bring more men." He looked at her with something like pain. "You would have me run again? Like an animal?" "I would have you live," she said, "for your child's sake, if not your own." His gaze softened again. "You speak like a woman who's forgotten what the world does to men like me." "I haven't forgotten," she said quietly. "I remember too well." He moved closer, his shadow falling over hers. "Then you know why I can't go." "Not yet." For a moment she didn't answer. The only sound was the soft breathing of the child, the whisper of wind outside, and the faint creak of the door settling back into place. Then she said, "Tell me what happened to you. The truth." He looked toward the fire, its glow painting his face in red and gold. "They took my home first," he said. "Then my people. I buried my brother with my own hands near the river where the mesquite grows. The soldiers came after, burned what was left, and called it justice. I went south, joined those who still fought. But the war changed. The white men stopped calling it war. They called it peace. Only there was no peace, only silence and ashes. She watched him, the pain in his voice stirring something deep inside her. "And now you've come back. To finish what began," he said, "and to find what I lost." His eyes met hers. "You." The room felt smaller suddenly, the air heavy with everything they could not say. He stepped closer, close enough that she could feel the heat of him, smell the dust and sweat of the trail. "You built a life on the bones of what we had," he said, "but it still calls you, doesn't it? The land, the wind, the nights that never ended." Her throat tightened. "Don't," she whispered. "You can't bring that back." "I don't need to," he said softly. "It never left." She turned away, blinking back the tears. "You don't understand what it's like to live here now. The town's changed. There are new laws, new men with badges. They won't forgive what you are." His voice dropped lower. "Then let them come." She faced him again, anger breaking through her fear. "And what happens to us when they do? What happens to your son when they put you in the ground?" He didn't answer. Instead, he looked toward the window again, where the lanterns from the search party still flickered faintly in the distance. "When he's old enough," he said, "he'll know who his father was. Not by stories, but by the land that still remembers him." She shook her head. "You're chasing ghosts." He turned back to her, his expression unreadable. "And you're trying to live among them." For a long moment, neither spoke. The fire burned low. The shadows grew longer. Outside, thunder rolled across the hills, a storm crawling in from the west. The Apache moved toward the door, his hand resting on the handle. "They'll be back at dawn," he said. "If I'm still here, blood will spill. But if I leave now, they'll hunt me to the mountains." She looked at him, torn between fear and something else she couldn't name. "Then what will you do?" He didn't turn as he answered. "What I've always done," he said quietly. "Survive." And with that, he stepped out into the dark, disappearing into the storm, leaving her alone with the echo of his words, and the uneasy feeling that this was only the beginning of something far larger and far more dangerous than either of them could yet see. The storm came fast that night, rolling in from the western hills like a dark wave swallowing the stars. The wind howled through the cracks of the cabin, shaking the shutters and sending dust down from the rafters. The woman sat by the window, holding a blanket around her shoulders, staring into the darkness where he had gone. She tried to listen for hoofbeats, for any sign that he was still near, but the wind drowned everything. Her child slept restlessly, murmuring in his dreams. Every crack of thunder made her flinch. She kept thinking of his words, the fire in his eyes, and the danger that now shadowed them all. By morning, the storm had passed, leaving the land washed and still. The air smelled of wet sage and smoke. She stepped outside with the child in her arms, scanning the horizon. The Apache was nowhere to be seen. The tracks of his horse led north toward the canyon, half washed away by rain. She followed them a few steps before stopping. It wasn't just fear that held her. It was something deeper, something she couldn't name. She knew that if she went after him, there would be no turning back. Later that day, the men returned. The neighbor was with them again, but this time there were more. Ranch hands, a deputy from town, and 2 soldiers from the fort. They rode in hard, their faces set. The deputy dismounted first, his boots sinking into the mud. "Morning, ma'am," he said, tipping his hat. "We're checking every homestead between here and the ridge. That Apache's still out there. Marshall says he might be the same one who raided the supply wagon last month." Her heart skipped. "Raided?" she asked. "Did someone die?" "2 men," he said flatly. "Left them in the dust. Took their rifles and horses. He's dangerous." He looked around the yard. "You sure you haven't seen anyone?" She hesitated. "No, just the storm." The neighbor shifted in his saddle, watching her closely. "You'd tell us if you did, wouldn't you? It's no good getting mixed up in something like this. The army don't ask twice when they find a friend of his kind." She met his eyes, trying to steady her voice. You think I'd lie about something like that? The deputy gave a short nod. All right, but if he comes back, you send word. You got a child to think about. When they rode off, she stood there until their figures disappeared behind the trees. Then she went back inside, closed the door, and pressed her hands to her face. The fear she had been holding back finally broke through, but it wasn't just fear of the soldiers. It was fear of what might happen if he came back. And somehow, she knew he would. That evening, as the sun dipped behind the ridge, she heard the faint sound of a horse near the barn. She rushed to the window. A shadow moved between the posts. Then the Apache appeared, his face half hidden by his hat, rain still clinging to his coat. He had come back, as she knew he would. She opened the door before he could knock. They were here, she said. The soldiers. They're looking for you. I saw them, he said quietly, stepping inside. His clothes were damp, his hair falling across his brow. They searched the ridge, but they won't find what they're looking for. Not yet. She looked at him, angry and relieved all at once. Why are you still here? You should have gone farther north, crossed the river before dawn. He shook his head. The river's watched. They know my trail now. If I cross, they'll find me before night. She moved to the table, her hands shaking as she poured him a cup of water. You can't keep coming here. They'll notice. They already think I'm hiding someone. He took the cup and drank, his eyes never leaving hers. And are you? She looked down. I don't know anymore. He smiled faintly, but there was no humor in it. You still think you can choose, he said. But the world already chose for us long ago. Their conversation was broken by the sound of the child stirring. He woke and rubbed his eyes, then smiled sleepily when he saw the Apache. The man crouched beside him, his rough hand brushing the boy's hair. He's grown strong, he murmured. He doesn't understand who you are, she said softly. Then tell him. She hesitated. He's too young to understand what happened before he was born. The Apache stood. He will one day. The blood in him will remind him of it. That night, after the boy had fallen asleep again, the Apache sat by the fire while she mended an old blanket. For a while, neither spoke. Then she asked, was it true, what they said, about the wagon? He stared into the flames. They came into the canyon at dusk, soldiers with rifles, said they were looking for a band of raiders. But it was them who fired first. I only did what I had to do. She looked up. And now they'll never stop hunting you. They were hunting me before that, he said. There's no peace for men like me. Not in this land. She wanted to argue, but his voice carried a truth she couldn't deny. The frontier had always been cruel, unforgiving to anyone who didn't belong. Even she, though born among the settlers, had never truly felt like she belonged either. Maybe that was why she had loved him once. Maybe that was why she still couldn't turn him away now. The next few days passed in uneasy quiet. The soldiers made camp near the river, watching the roads. The townfolk whispered in the store and at the well. Some said the Apache had been seen near the cliffs, others that he was long gone. But at night, she heard him moving in the woods. Never far, always close enough that she felt his presence. The neighbor came again on the third day, riding up with his usual cautious smile. You sure you're managing out here alone? He asked. The army's nervous. Some of the men say they're gonna burn out the canyons if they don't find him soon. I'm fine, she said quickly. He looked at her, his tone softening. You don't have to lie to me. I've seen how you look toward the hills. If he's out there, you can still set things right. Tell them where to look and they'll forget your name in the reports. Her throat tightened. And if I don't? He sighed. Then they'll come here again. But next time they won't knock first. That night, she sat awake long after the child had fallen asleep. The Apache returned just before dawn, his face shadowed with exhaustion. They've sent more men, he said. I saw them crossing near the ridge. By tomorrow they'll reach this valley. Then leave, she said, before it's too late. He stared at her, silent for a moment. You think I came back just for you? He said finally. There's more at stake than you know. The ranchers took land that wasn't theirs. My people still hide in the desert. If they burn the canyons, the last of them will die. Her eyes widened. You're not just running from them. No, he said. I'm fighting to keep what little's left. She sank into a chair, her hands trembling. You can't fight the army alone. Then I'll die trying, he said. The words hit her like a stone. She stood and crossed the room, grabbing his arm. Don't talk like that. You think dying will fix anything? You think your son will understand that? His expression softened. He will understand honor. He will understand that a man who kneels loses more than life. She stepped closer, her voice breaking. And what about me? What do I understand? He looked down at her, his jaw tightening. You understand what it means to love something the world says you can't have. For a moment, neither moved. Then a sound outside made them both freeze. The crack of a branch, the low murmur of voices. The Apache moved to the window, parting the curtain with the barrel of his rifle. Lantern light flickered between the trees. They've found me, he whispered. Her breath caught. What will you do? He turned to her, his voice calm and steady. What I must. She reached for him, desperate. If you fight, they'll kill you. If I run, they'll find this place again, he said. And next time they won't ask questions. The child stirred, sitting up with frightened eyes as the sound of horses filled the air outside. The woman's heart raced. She turned to the Apache, but he was already at the door, rifle in hand, his expression carved in stone. He looked back at her one last time. Stay inside, he said, no matter what you hear. And before she could stop him, he stepped out into the gray morning light, the door closing softly behind him, through the window. She saw his silhouette moving through the fog, one man against the world, standing alone between the cabin and the line of riders that waited at the edge of the clearing. The wind carried the faint metallic sound of a rifle bolt, then silence. The soldiers called out for surrender, their voices echoing across the wet earth. But the Apache didn't answer. The woman clutched her child close, her eyes wide with terror, as thunder rolled again. Not from the sky this time, but from the guns that began to speak in the distance. The sound tore through the still air, and the valley once more became a place of fire and dust. The morning broke heavy and gray, the kind of light that made everything look washed and lifeless. Smoke hung low across the valley, curling around the cabins like a warning. The gunfire had stopped, but the silence that followed was worse. The woman stood by the window holding her son close, her body shaking with every breath. The smell of burnt powder drifted through the cracks in the walls. Somewhere out there beyond the trees, men were moving, soldiers shouting orders, horses snorting, boots crushing wet grass. She didn't know if he was still alive. She didn't dare step outside to find out. The child stirred in her arms, whispering in a sleepy voice, "Mama, what's happening?" She couldn't answer. Her mouth felt dry as dust. She just held him tighter, hoping he wouldn't ask again. The last thing she'd seen was the Apache stepping into the open, his rifle raised, the soldiers spreading out in a half circle around him. Then the shots came, one after another, until smoke and wind blurred everything. She had forced herself to pull the curtain closed, afraid that if she looked again, she'd see him fall. Now, as the minutes stretched, she felt the weight of that decision like a stone pressing on her chest. Maybe he was lying out there somewhere, bleeding into the earth that had already taken too much from him. Maybe he was still fighting. Or maybe, just maybe, he had disappeared again into the land like the wind itself. Outside, a voice shouted something she couldn't make out. Then came the sound of boots on the porch. She froze. The door swung open with a sharp crack. The deputy stepped inside, his coat soaked and muddy, his rifle still in his hands. He looked around quickly, his eyes landing on her. "It's over," he said flatly. Her heart jumped. "Where is he?" she asked. The deputy's jaw tightened. "Ran off toward the ridge. Took one of our men down doing it. He's hit, but he's still moving. The marshal's sending riders after him. We'll bring him in by sundown." She shook her head. "You won't catch him." His eyes narrowed. "You sound mighty sure about that." "I just know the land," she said. "He knows it better." The deputy studied her for a long moment. "You've got a strange way of talking for someone who's supposed to be afraid." "I am afraid," she said quietly. "Just not of him." He looked around again, his tone sharpening. "If he comes back here, you tell us. You understand? The marshal won't be kind if he thinks you're helping him. When he left, The sound of hooves faded slowly into the distance, but she still couldn't breathe right. She waited until the valley went quiet again, then set the child down on the bed and reached for her shawl. She needed to know the truth with her own eyes. She stepped out into the open air. The ground was torn with tracks. The grass flattened where men had fought. Spent shells glimmered in the mud. Near the tree line she found blood, dark, wet, leading north toward the ridge. Her breath caught in her throat. She followed it a few steps before stopping. The prints were heavy at first, then lighter, as if he'd slowed or stumbled. The blood trailed into the rocks and vanished among the shadows. A gust of wind blew through the canyon, carrying the faintest echo of something. Metal clinking, maybe a stirrup, maybe nothing at all. She turned back toward the cabin, her heart aching, her mind torn between fear and something dangerously close to hope. That night, the boy couldn't sleep. Every sound made him jump. The creak of the roof, the rustle of wind against the windows. She sat by his bedside, humming softly to calm him, though her voice trembled with exhaustion. When the lantern burned low, she rose to add another log to the fire. That's when she heard it, a faint tap at the door barely there. Her blood froze. She moved quietly, lifting the rifle from above the hearth. The tap came again, softer this time, like a whisper. She took a step closer, then another, and pressed her ear to the wood. "Who's there?" she whispered. "It's me." She dropped the rifle and opened the door. He was there, barely standing, his face pale, blood soaking through his sleeve. The storm had left his hair wet and matted, his breath coming in short bursts. "Close it," he said. She pulled him inside quickly and barred the door. He leaned against the wall, his hand pressed to his shoulder. "They're still searching the ridge," he said. "I had to move before sunrise." She tore a strip from a clean cloth and went to him. "You're bleeding," she said. He gave a faint smile. "It's not the first time." As she cleaned the wound, her hands shook. The bullet had grazed him but gone deep enough to tear flesh. "You shouldn't have come here," she said, though her voice carried no anger, only fear. "I had nowhere else to go," he said. "And I couldn't leave without seeing him again." Her eyes met his. "If they find you here, it'll be both our graves." He looked past her toward the sleeping boy. "If they come for me, they won't touch him." The hours passed in uneasy silence. He dozed by the fire while she kept watch, listening to the faint sound of rain returning outside, the flicker of the flame threw their shadows across the walls, two figures bound by something neither could escape. When dawn came, she stood at the window again. The soldiers were back in the valley, their campfires glowing faintly near the river. She could see their banners moving through the fog. The Apache stirred behind her. "They're closing in," she said. He nodded slowly. "Then I'll draw them away." She turned, panic flashing in her eyes. "No, you'll die out there." He rose, steadying himself. "If I stay, they'll come for you and the boy. They'll burn this place to the ground. You know they will." She stepped closer, her voice breaking. "There must be another way." "There isn't," he said quietly. "Not anymore." He looked down at her, his eyes softening. "When they come, take the boy to the creek hollow. Stay until the second night. I'll find you." Her lips trembled. "You can't promise that." He touched her hand gently, his fingers rough and warm. "I have to." For a moment, neither moved. Then from outside came the distant call of a bugle, the soldiers assembling. The sound cut through the valley like a blade. The Apache turned toward the door, pulling his coat tight. She grabbed his arm. "Please," she said. "Don't do this." He looked at her one last time, the corners of his mouth lifting in a faint, sad smile. "You always said I belonged to the land," he murmured. "Maybe that's where I'm meant to end." Then he was gone again, out into the gray morning. She ran to the window, her breath fogging the glass. He moved through the fog like a shadow, one man against the rising storm of soldiers coming down the ridge. By midday, the valley was alive with the echo of gunfire again. Horses screamed, men shouted orders, and the smell of smoke thickened in the air. The woman fled with her child through the back field, clutching the boy's hand, her heart pounding in her chest. The sounds of battle followed them, rolling through the canyon like thunder. She stumbled on a root, fell hard, but the boy helped her up, his small face streaked with dirt and tears. "Where are we going, Mama?" he cried. "To the creek," she said breathlessly. "We have to hide." They reached the dry bed as the first flames appeared on the horizon. The soldiers had set the grass ablaze to flush him out. She pulled the boy into the hollow beneath the rocks, holding him close as smoke drifted through the trees. The child whimpered, pressing his face against her chest. From far away came the unmistakable crack of a rifle. Then another, then silence. She held her breath, counting the seconds, listening for the sound of his horse, for anything. But there was nothing, only the faint hiss of burning grass and the low rumble of thunder gathering again over the ridge. The night that followed was endless. She didn't sleep, didn't move, afraid even to breathe too loudly. Each rustle of leaves made her think it was him, or them coming closer. Her mind replayed his last words again and again. When the second dawn came, she finally dared to climb out of the hollow. The valley below was blackened, still smoldering. The cabins had survived, but the fields were gone. She could see soldiers riding in the distance, moving slow now, as though the fight had drained them. No one looked toward the ridge anymore. No one searched the creek. It was as if they believed the land had already claimed him. She stared across the burned plain, her heart heavy with dread and hope twisted together. The child tugged at her sleeve. "Is he coming back, Mama?" he asked softly. She looked toward the horizon where the sky met the ash-covered hills. The wind shifted, carrying with it the faint smell of rain and something older, like dust and fire and memory. She swallowed hard, her voice breaking when she finally answered. "I don't know," she said. The boy looked up at her, his small hand tightening around hers. And as the clouds gathered over the scorched land, the woman stood there, waiting, her heart caught between what she had lost and what might still be out there, somewhere beyond the smoke, beyond the ridge, where the Apache had vanished into the wild that had always been his home. The sky turned pale after the fire. For days, smoke drifted low across the valley, mixing with mist from the river until the air itself seemed bruised. The woman and her child returned to the cabin slowly, moving through what was left of the land. The ground was still warm in places, the grass black and brittle underfoot. The air smelled of ash and wet wood. The barn was half collapsed, the fences burned, and the garden, once full of corn and beans, was gone. She didn't cry. She just stood there for a long time, holding the boy's hand, staring at the place where her life had once felt steady. When she finally went inside, the cabin was as they had left it. The bed, the old table, the small chair by the fire, all untouched by flame. But it felt empty now, hollow in a way she couldn't explain. The Apache's rifle still leaned against the wall where he had left it. His tracks were gone, washed away by rain. But the feeling of him lingered in the air like a memory that refused to fade. The soldiers left the valley soon after. They had done what they came to do, burned the brush, buried their dead, and told the town the Apache was gone. Some said he had fallen in the canyon. Others whispered he had vanished into the mountains to die alone. The army didn't care much for which story people believed, only that the fighting had stopped. The neighbor came by once, offering to help rebuild the barn. His face was worn and gray, his voice quiet when he spoke. "It's over," he said. "You can start again." She nodded, but there was no real answer in her eyes. He looked around the yard, then back at her. "They found tracks by the creek," he said softly. "One man's horse. Looked like he bled a lot before the rain came." Her throat tightened. "Did they find him?" He shook his head. "No, just the blood. Might have been washed into the river." She forced a small smile, though her hands trembled. "Then maybe he's still out there." The man gave her a long look. "Sometimes it's better not to know," he said, then turned his horse and rode away. For weeks, she lived quietly. The town forgot about the fires soon enough. New settlers came, drawn by the promise of land. The soldiers didn't return. Life began again in its stubborn way, slow, cautious, but moving forward all the same. The woman tended what was left of her garden, mended the fences that could still stand, and watched her child grow stronger every day. The boy loved the hills, loved to run along the creek where the wildflowers had started to bloom again after the rains. He didn't speak much about the night of the fire, though sometimes she caught him staring toward the ridge, as if waiting for someone he couldn't quite remember. One evening, when the sky was turning gold and purple, she sat on the porch with her sewing and watched the boy chase a stray chicken across the yard. The sound of his laughter carried in the air like music she hadn't heard in years. For the first time, she felt something close to peace. But then the wind shifted, and from somewhere far away a sound drifted through the quiet, the faint echo of a horse's call. Her hands froze. She lifted her head, listening. The boy stopped too, his small face turning toward the ridge. There, on the far edge of the horizon, a lone figure appeared against the fading light. The outline was small at first, blurred by distance, but her heart recognized the shape long before her eyes did. A rider on a dark horse moving slow, as if the land itself carried him home. She rose from the porch, her breath caught between disbelief and hope. The boy ran to her side, gripping her dress. "Mama," he whispered. "Who is that?" She didn't answer. She just watched as the figure drew closer, crossing the open plain with the easy rhythm of someone who belonged to it. The horse's mane gleamed like black fire under the sun. The rider's shoulders were straight, though his movements were careful, as if every step still carried pain. When he finally reached the fence line, he stopped. For a long moment, no one spoke. The air hung heavy between them, full of the things they had both lost and somehow found again. Then she stepped forward, her hands trembling. "You're alive," she said softly. He nodded once, his eyes tired but clear. "The river carried me farther than I thought," he said. "Took me a long time to come back." The boy peeked out from behind her, his wide eyes full of wonder. The Apache looked down at him, and the faintest smile touched his face. "You've grown," he said quietly. The woman's eyes filled. "We thought you were gone." "I was," he said simply. "But the land didn't let me go." She reached through the fence, her fingers brushing his. His skin was rough, scarred, but warm. The world around them seemed to pause. The wind, the crickets, even the fading light, all holding still as if waiting. Then he dismounted slowly, his movements stiff but steady, and stood on the other side of the fence. "I can't stay long," he said. "The army still watches the passes. But I had to see you both." She looked at him, her heart breaking all over again. "Then what will you do?" He glanced toward the hills. "There are people still hiding in the mesas, families, children. They'll need someone who knows how to move unseen. Someone who remembers what was lost." Her voice wavered. "And what about us?" He met her eyes. "You'll be safe now. They won't come again." The silence that followed was full of everything they couldn't say. She wanted to tell him to stay, to forget the fight, to build a life here. But she knew better. The land had its own laws, and men like him didn't belong to quiet homes or easy peace. He looked down at the boy again, his hand resting gently on the child's shoulder. "The world will try to make him forget who he is," he said. "Don't let them." She nodded, tears running down her cheeks. "I won't." He stepped back, tightening the reins. "When he's old enough, tell him I rode for what was left of our people. Tell him I kept my word." The boy clung to her hand, confused but silent. The Apache mounted his horse again, his figure framed by the wide, endless sky. "Goodbye," she whispered. He paused, his gaze steady on hers. "Not goodbye," he said. "Just the end of one road." Then he turned and rode away, the sound of the horse's hooves fading into the wind. She stood there long after he disappeared from sight, the evening light falling soft across the valley. The boy pressed against her side, and together they watched the horizon until the first stars began to shine. The days that followed were quiet again. The land healed in its slow, stubborn way. Grass grew back over the burned fields, the creek filled with clear water, and birds returned to the trees. The woman worked the soil, teaching her son to plant seeds, to build fences, to listen to the wind for signs of change. And sometimes, when the night was still, she thought she heard the faint rhythm of hooves far off in the distance, a reminder that somewhere beyond those hills, he was still out there, keeping his promise to the land and to them. Years passed. The boy grew tall, his hair dark like his father's, his spirit restless like the wind that shaped the canyons. He learned the ways of both worlds, the settlers' words and the silence of the wild. People in town spoke kindly of the woman who raised him alone, though none ever asked too many questions. The valley became quiet again, peaceful even. But in the evenings, when the sun dipped low and painted the hills red, she sometimes caught sight of a rider moving along the horizon, just far enough to make her wonder if it was memory or truth. She never remarried. She didn't need to. Her life was full enough, with work, with the boy, with the land that had once burned and now bloomed again. And every spring, when the first flowers appeared by the creek, she would walk there with her son and leave a small bundle of wild sage tied with twine, letting the wind carry the scent across the valley. Some said she was honoring the dead. Others said she was waiting for a ghost. But in her heart, she knew it was neither. It was for a promise, a life bound by love, loss, and something far stronger than either. One evening, many years later, when the boy had grown into a man and she had grown old, a storm rolled over the hills again. The wind howled through the valley, bending the trees, filling the air with dust and rain. She sat by the window, wrapped in a blanket, and smiled faintly at the sound. The storm didn't frighten her anymore. It reminded her of a time when the world still felt wild and alive, when love came like thunder and left its mark deep in the earth. And as the first flash of lightning lit the sky, she whispered softly to the dark, her voice steady and sure. "You came back once," she said. That was enough. Outside, the wind answered, carrying the faint echo of a rider's call across the canyon, low, distant, eternal, before fading into the sound of rain falling on the land that had always remembered them both.